You're listening to the Around the Lens podcast, the home of high-quality, roundtable, visual journalism discussion about the news, topics, and gear related to our career field. Now, here's the host of our show, David J. Murphy.
Hello, and welcome to Around the Lens, episode 234. I'm your host, David J. Murphy. Around the Lens is the only visual journalism-focused roundtable discussion show on the internet. I am a visual journalist based out of South Korea, but let me talk to you about our guests this week. Joining us around the table is a freelance commercial photographer and APA chairman, Mr. Travis W. Keys. Hello, Travis.
Hey, Dave. What's going on, my friend?
Not much, buddy. I had notes this time, so hopefully I didn't mess up your title too bad. Try to condense it, because you have a very long title, and
I wear many different hats. This is true.
You do. I've seen you, like 3-4 hats. You pile them high.
I know. Very nice. I don't look great in hats. I can get away with like 2 hats, baseball cap and maybe a cowboy hat. That's basically it. All other hats just don't quite work.
Absolutely. Also joining us this week in Washington, D.C. is freelance photojournalist Evelyn Hochstein. Hello, Evelyn.
Hey, everybody. Good morning.
Good morning. You're sounding a little bit low. I don't know if that's my end.
Nope, she sounded suddenly distant.
Okay. I don't like it when Evelyn's distant, you know? So she's going for coffee or some other thing she has to do.
I have a lot of morning prep work, yeah.
Right, well, welcome back from Cape Cod, Evelyn.
Thank you. Trust me, you want me to have my coffee in the morning.
Indeed. I'm the same way. Our special guest this week is a documentary photographer, photojournalist, and filmmaker based in Los Angeles, Isadora Kosofsky. Hello, Isadora.
Hi, good morning. Thanks for having me.
Good morning. Thank you so much for joining us from Los Angeles. I know it's early over there, but I definitely appreciate your dedication to the show and getting up early for us. That's very appreciated. I am so eager to talk to you all about, your work and, of course, the work you've done, covering so many different great stories, but of course your project on, the sort of threesome senior couple that we'll talk about towards the end of this week's show. But let's get into the visual journalism news of the week first and foremost. First up, you're going to like this topic, Travis. Let's talk Sony. Sony finally confirmed what many of us suspected, and some of us already knew, Travis, that the long-rumored A7S III will be a reality. Hot on the heels of Canon's recent bombshell announcements of the Canon R5 and R6. I did use hot on purpose there, but anyways.
That was good.
Thank you. Sony will be revealing the A7S III on July 28th. Now, official specs have not been released, but there are many rumors going around. So let's talk about those rumors and what they mean for Sony, the camera industry, and why Canon is still far superior, in my opinion. Anyways, we've got a redesigned 12-megapixel sensor with fast readout, whatever that means, a 16-bit RAW output, a claimed 15 stops of dynamic range, 1080p 240 for slow motion, some 10-bit 422 4K, 600 megabits per second bit rate, base ISO of 160, no record limits. I'm sure that'll be rubbed in my face. Fully articulating screen. Welcome to the club. And dual UHS to SD card slots. Normally, I would typically throw this to you, Travis, because you're our Sony expert. But as is tradition on Around the Lens, we always give first topic to our guest. So, Isadora, first off, what do you shoot with, and what are your thoughts on Sony's new camera?
I just recently started using Sony in the last year, but I'm still mainly on a Nikon D850. But I started with the Sony R series in the last year, and I like it. It's what would be my opinion on it versus Nikon? I've been a loyal Nikon user, holder. What would you? I don't know. Shooter. I've been a full Nikon customer I recently transitioned to Sony, and I think their units are wonderful. They're great. They're great gear. I'm looking forward to continuing to use them and seeing their improvements. I use my Sony both for stills and for motion. You're able to.
I'm sorry. What do you use for stills?
The Sony. Well, I use the Sony R7 for stills and for motion work for
Okay.
4K.
Okay.
A documentary feature that I've been developing for the past 8 years, and I
Oh my
was
gosh.
using Canon, and then I switched to Sony, and it's been great. It's beautiful 4K footage, so I'm excited for the new developments.
You said you've been doing this documentary for 8 years, so I'm imagining you've probably started in 1080p and have transitioned to 4K, or have you always been shooting 4K somehow with this?
Oh no, I was on a Nikon Mark III mounted on a Red Rock system when I first started with this woman that I've been shadowing. So it's a bit of a challenge in the editing room.
Yeah.
But it works out. You know, it's a longitudinal study of her life, and she is a fascinating, powerful woman to watch and observe and immerse yourself in. Her life is so dynamic. So I don't think people will be as hung up on the footage, but with color correction and editing tricks, it's looking okay, quality-wise. Yeah.
Now, obviously, the S series have been more, they can obviously shoot photos, but they're more video-centric cameras. Does the S series or this S camera intrigue you at all? Do you think you might add it to your collection and potentially use it for your documentary? Or are you pretty happy with what the R produces for you?
I think I'm happy with what I have, but who knows? Maybe that would make sense to transition to that.
Yeah, absolutely. Evelyn, you recently tried Sony equipment for your protest work. You were considering the A9. Does this camera intrigue you at all? Or is it, again, more video focused and your work is more photo focused, so it doesn't really something you might consider?
You're muted, Evelyn.
I haven't spent too much time considering it. Too many choices. Technical. I really liked the A9, and I think I need to now give the new Canon a try. So I think I'm going to focus on that. I shoot so little video. I mean, I'd like to shoot more video, obviously, but right now that would be just autofocus and stills would be the biggest priority. Like ramping up my autofocus game.
Yeah. I mean, we didn't have you on last week to talk about the R5, and that was one of our big discussion topics. So, I mean, it's been a week now, been about, 2 weeks or so since the camera was announced. What are your thoughts on it? The R5
Honestly,
and the R6.
I've read a couple reviews. I got to get my hands on it. I can read all about it, but really until I try it, I'm not going to, jump. Like, it's not in the same wheel. It's like if it was the next iteration of like the Mark IV, let's say, and my Mark IV now is several years old and it was time for me to upgrade, I might just like jump and buy the latest model. But for mirrorless, I got to try it because it's still a challenge for me. And I really did enjoy shooting with the Sonys, but it just makes more sense being a Canon person that I would give this a shot before I jump ship. Although you can use the lens adapters, so there is that on the Sonys. So I don't know, Canon. Let me get my hands on it, and
well, no one really has their hands on it yet, so
yeah, and I don't know how long down
that's your Peter McKinnon.
The list.
Exactly.
People who want to try it, but I have to give props to Sony for just sending me. They sent me like so much demo gear. It was pretty awesome to try. Yeah, it was great.
Well, it's just piling up in their warehouse because no one else wants it.
No, she actually knew someone that was hooked her up with Sony. That's all.
Yeah.
She had ends. I
need somebody to hook me up with Canon stuff. I need some ends of Canon.
Well, you can't get it because nobody has it yet.
Yeah. If I was still in Long Island, I know where the Canon service center is. Maybe I could like weasel my way in there and see if they have one.
Didn't they close that down? I think they closed that. Yeah,
they did. Oh, that's sad. I remember I found memories of that place.
I don't think there's anything on the East Coast now to send your.
Yeah, I know. I send mine to Newport News, Virginia.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. They closed it down.
So obviously, Evelyn, yeah, you want to get your hands on the equipment. I'm probably, is there somewhere in DC where you could potentially try the camera and try it out before buying it, or do you think you'll have to buy it?
I think I'd go through CPS. I mean, it might be really hard to get like a demo of it, but that would be my route, would be to call either local Canon rep or go through CPS and see. Right. But I bet it's going to be pretty hard.
There'll be a little weight on that one.
It might be, yeah. So, I don't know.
Wait until the Mark II version comes out.
Yeah, right. Okay.
And get used Mark I. Exactly. Now, obviously, you're waiting to get your hands on it, but does the R5 or the R6, do you have a preference towards either one based on the specs?
No,
do you want higher? I know you're primarily a photographer, so do you want a 20 megapixel sensor or a 45 megapixel sensor? Obviously, I think you want more megapixels, but you tell me. What's more important to you?
I don't know, Dave. I'd have to read it again. I mean, I glanced at it. I was like, "Ooh, this sounds great." But
do you want to spend $4,000 or do you want to spend $2,500?
I don't know. When you're spending that many thousands of dollars on a camera, like $1,000,
you expect it not to. You're right. You expect it not to overheat and to actually work. It's true.
Well, it won't overheat when taking photos. This is what Evelyn primarily does. So.
This is true.
All right. We've waited long enough. Travis. Gush about the Sony A7S III and why it's the next coming of,
No, I can't talk.
God's gift to camera gear. I know. Well, you can talk about the rumored specs.
I can talk about all the rumored specs. Yes.
I know you can't talk about what actually is going to in it, but
Yeah. So the rumored specs are. I mean, this is a camera that unlike the R5, which is trying to blend really good video specs into a camera Canon's never been great about. They've always crippled their video. They've always had either crop or somewhat 4K and stuff like that. I think this is one of those another iterations of where they don't quite have the video there yet. I think it's an interesting camera. I think it's the next step. I think people that jump on this early might be making a mistake because it's just too early and it's not in enough hands yet to see the real life and what it's going to do. Whereas the Sony A7 III, the S3 is now, its third generation of it. They waited a long time to put this one out for very specific reasons, and they're addressing issues that I don't know why Canon didn't address. I mean, if you're going to do 8K, it's going to run hot. And if they're running, putting out a statement about it, running hot on 4K and 8K, they should have addressed those. They saw 2-3 versions of Sony where they were having overheat problems. Now, Sony has really kind of redesigned from the ground up this whole camera to deal with different heat sinks, the way it deals with the air coming through it. And it's shooting 4K at 120 FPS. It's 16-bit raw output. It's now using supposedly a slot that uses UHS-2 and CF in the same slot, which is really impressive. It finally brought an articulating screen, which we've been waiting for forever on. It has 16-bit raw output supposedly. This is a camera that doesn't have record limits, that doesn't overheat. This is a serious camera for people that want to record and use video. And it's geared to that. And now they're saying it doesn't no longer stand for sensitive on the S. It sounds for superior. That's what the Sony is claiming, but we'll see. I mean, it's obviously a very, very intriguing camera, and a lot of people in production world and in video are going to jump onto this because of its form factor and now what it can do in terms of video, and also all the different S-logs and profiles that it puts in its cameras that Canon and other people do not do. It has a lot of stuff going for it.
Yeah, again, based on the rumored specs that have been, talked about here, do you think this might be a camera that would be added to your collection? Like, do you see
I don't do enough video work for me to spend I would rather put my money into an R, which shoots great 4K and it's beautiful and it doesn't overheat. I can get away with what I'm doing on my my A7 III, my R4, so I can get away with that. If I was going to do kind of a lot more video production stuff like that, I would get this camera. I mean, it's a 12 megapixel camera. Granted, people get all kind of bent on what is 12 megapixels versus 40. The video on this one, the actual pixels are much bigger, so they're much more sensitive to the light coming in. So that's why you get that great low light performance. And the way they've kind of stacked their sensors and stuff like that and use it actually allows for faster readouts. And their EVF has already been amazing. This one is supposed to be even better, so it's probably going to be the best EVF out there.
Yeah, I know, absolutely. Obviously, if the rumors are true that it's only going to be a 12 megapixel sensor, are you disappointed by that, or do you think?
Because I mean, that's more than enough for 4K. I mean, it's going to look beautiful. The video is like you don't even use it's like that's that sensor, the way it uses light. I actually went and shot a whole a photo series on that camera, the very first generation A7S in Guatemala on the streets, and the pictures I got were beautiful. And I didn't have to bring any lights with me. I shot just available light on the streets of Guatemala at night, and it was beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Isadora, you mentioned that you shot Nikon. Nikon, of course, released their mirrorless cameras last year or 2 years ago now. Their Z series. I don't know if you looked into those as potential, cameras for your kit or not, but of course they're potentially announcing, like, this is the year of new announcements of cameras, it seems. So they're potentially going to announce their like Z6S or Z7S, their next iteration of those cameras. Do you given any consideration to what Nikon's offering, in terms of their mirrorless cameras?
I transitioned to Sony for mirrorless, and I haven't tried the Z series. I would be open to it, just
okay.
But it looks great. However, I don't know that many documentary photographers using the Z series, but maybe that's an ignorant comment. But from my circle of friends, colleagues, I've heard of. I know Carol Guzzi uses the Z series and has shot some beautiful work about the migrant crisis over a year ago using the Z series at night, and it looked very good image quality wise. But I don't know. I guess I've just maybe I don't put enough thought into my gear. Maybe the Z is on the horizon.
In reality, the only gear that matters is the 6 inches behind the viewfinder, right? That's the only.
Is your head?
Gear.
I have 12 inches, but if you're only using 6, man, you might.
It's the frontal lobe. That's where all the imagery. Or whatever. However the saying goes.
Yeah. No, I think the main difference from all these cameras is if you're relying on using this camera as a video camera and you're relying on it to shoot video, you have to make sure it's going to work in a critical situation. So if you're getting a one take of something and your camera overheats or goes down because of something like that, you have to make sure that whatever you're recording on is going to do it. So if you have a no time limit and stuff like that on the Sony S, that's going to be a more is a more professional camera. Any other camera that possible could overheat and just shut down while you're filming, it's just not going to be a professional camera for you or in professional usage, and I wouldn't use it. And if you were going to actually really use any of the Canon stuff, for $4,000 on that the R5, you expect it not to turn off after 10 minutes after, especially on 4K, and you might as well buy a C100 or a C200 if you're really going after video, because those are beautiful cameras and they work fantastic.
Yeah, I'm very intrigued by the 4K 120 if it can actually reach that spec and shoot and not have the limits or the overheating. That's very impressive to me.
Yeah.
What I've always loved the S series cameras for their low light capability, and I've always been blown away by how well it can record in low light. I would love it if they somehow were able to shoot in even lower light and maintain that quality, although I don't think the sensor size is changing. So I don't know if they are able, if you can claim this 15 stops of dynamic range, maybe they can get better low light quality and shoot in a darker situation. I think that would be pretty intriguing if they can make that more robust. But yeah, be on the lookout. It's always we can we rib each other about our camera choices, of course, but all the manufacturers pushing the limits is what it's all about. And I'm really intrigued to see how these new technologies in the S series fall in line with the R and the regular 7. And I think, we're going to see this like definitely, integrated into those bodies if they can handle it. And perhaps, I mean, the R is the resolution beast. Perhaps that will be the one that shoots 8K, in the future.
My only actual worry about the S, and it'll be seen, is because of the way they're doing the heat flow and the sinking, and possibly adding some airflow to it, that makes it a little less weatherproof. So I don't know about the weatherproof on this and using it in rain, if that is the case. So that'll be something to be seen.
Yeah, speaking of that, I got my S1H right here. I just happen to have it with me. And, if you've not seen the camera in person, it's got little air vents right here.
Yeah.
It's got air vents right here, so you can't really shoot this thing like in the rain or the surf or anything like that. So.
Does it take two people to hold that thing because it's so big?
Yeah, it's a team of 4 actually. So I hold the body, someone else holds the lens, someone holds me, and then someone else holds that person. So it's a team effort. It's not that bad actually. I wish Canon had released like, okay, here's the R5, right, that overheats and has the limits. And then here's the R5S that has a fan on it that doesn't overheat. That would have been nice if Canon could do that.
Was there a third camera? Was there a revamp of the R, the last R?
No, there was the R and the RP. The RP was just the cheap version, and I think there was the RA, which was the astronomy version.
I think they're doing a second version of the R, which doesn't have the video features, and it's an update to the R. I could be wrong, but I thought I heard that.
I don't know. We'll see. All right. Well, let's go ahead and move. Yeah, let's go ahead and move on to our next topic. Basically, what we're talking about this week for our second topic is about decolonizing the photo industry. So, as one Danielle A. Scruggs talks about in her opinion piece for Rangefinder. While not directly related to the Photo Bill of Rights conversations we've had over the past few weeks, there are shades of that topic within what Danielle is trying to talk about with her opinion piece. Basically, within the article, at least the way I read it, is that, from her opinion, we need an open the door and present more opportunities to minority visual journalists, especially when covering issues related to that group. As a photo editor, Danielle saw a gap in coverage for her newspaper, particularly in areas of Black and Latino members, and decided to cover it with people who could relate to those regions. I'm just going to open this up to the panel. I'm not selecting anyone specific to start talking about it, but do you agree or disagree with Danielle? Should race, gender, nationality, or any other factors besides skill and capability play a role when choosing someone to cover a story? So I'll just open that up to the crowd.
Come on,
okay,
guess.
No takers. I'm going to pick on somebody now.
I'm refreshing my memory here.
Well,
it's a very interesting topic, and it's one that we kind of, there's all these, there's no black and white to it. There's so many shades of gray to this, and it should be, I think that's why we kind of hesitate when we ask the question, is because there's no clear cut answer to this one. I mean, it's so layered. It really is.
Yeah, I mean,
I agree.
I certainly think, as a woman, I've been given assignments because I'm a woman, having access to certain sympathetic topics or sensitive topics, if it's regarding sexual abuse or rape or childbirth even. So, there are times, I think, when photo editors, or even, it just is maybe easier. Does that mean I think that men couldn't cover the same topics that I'm covering? And then when you get into race, it gets even trickier. It's there's always that I just glanced at the article, but I mean, you're looking at it from an empathy perspective, and a connection perspective. So there's always the element of being able to build trust with your subject and connect with your subject, and then bring back, the best pictures. But I think that in our industry, we've seen that many groups have been, just underrepresented. So either persons of color or even women, for that matter, or transgender, LGBT community, all of the entire mass of photographers and people doing, in the professional world is broadening, and we're opening our eyes to the need, that we need more diversity. It has been exclusive in some ways, and we're trying to fix that. But like as a general principle, I think, I would love to believe that everybody can connect and do the same work. But I know for a fact that there are times when a subject might feel more comfortable with, depending on the gender or race of the photographer, and that might be a call that an editor wants to make, like who can get the best access, who can connect, who's going to make someone feel more comfortable. As a general principle in covering the news, it's a broad topic. There's no clear-cut answer, but I know for a fact that when I've photographed women who've been victims of rape, I don't know if a man would be able to have the same access or empathy, or it doesn't mean that they can't have empathy, but that the subject may not feel. They may automatically feel that there's a barrier. And, I'd love to believe that we could all connect in our own way, but I think there are differences. And there may be, this is a very valid discussion.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's why I'm bringing it up, because I think, there's something to be said about the nature of how we assign jobs and whatnot, different sort of topics and areas to cover. I think, when we have talked about certain topics like this in the past and in certain areas, I know we've had on photojournalists who have covered, like women in Afghanistan. And that's a very kind of closed off society with very rigid gender roles and rules. And so in that case, these women were much, it was almost like you couldn't even have a guy alone with them in sort of their private areas to do, it was physically and like legally, who knows, religiously impossible to do that and cover it in any way that would be honest to the subject. So yeah, in certain cases like that, I believe fully that, picking the right person for the job is essential. Isadora, you're part of Women Photograph. Danielle is part of, Women Photograph. She was a mentor for the group. I don't know if you knew her or, I know, Evelyn, you're also a member of Women Photograph, if either of you know her, but, what are your thoughts on sort of the topics that Danielle has kind of brought up here? Do you agree with any of them or disagree, or what are your thoughts?
I don't know what topics in particular you're referencing. The first thing I will say is it's very hard to have a panel discussion about diversity and race and not have a person of color photographer on the panel.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's hard as 4 white people. I don't want to assume whiteness here, but from what I can see, to have a discussion about race is the first thing I would say, because we don't have that marginal voice represented. But what I will say is that the discussion around diversity is a critical one, because I do think that the personal experiences of a photographer, the experience of identity as a photographer is an important one. The lived experience storyteller versus the limited lived experience storyteller is a different voice and vision.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, I think that one would hope that all people could cover stories, but I think it's mainly about asking yourself on a personal level when you get an assignment or when you start a personal project, are you the person to be telling the story? And looking into why you want to tell a story. Do you feel a sense of responsibility in doing it, a sense of duty? Why do you feel connected to the subject matter or the persons or the community before going into it? Because it being a good story is not grounds for sensitive work. You need to feel fully invested. And I'm not saying that certain stories are off limit to people who don't belong to that community, but I think it's very important to think and reflect before entering into those spaces. Because like what was saying in terms of representation of women photographers telling the stories of women, I've also received multiple reactions from survivors of violence, from survivors of childhood trauma who are women or women identified, who have told me, I showed up with a writer about a year ago on an assignment about a woman who had been sexually assaulted in the workplace. And she said within a few minutes of us entering the space on the first day of documenting her, how relieved she was that they sent women to document the story. So I also think that it relates to subject comfort level, which is not to say that over time and with the kind of presence we can need to bring to a space that somebody who's from a disparate community might not grow and adapt to our presence. But I think ultimately it's very important to consider the author when assigning. And I don't think that it's that white photographers can't still tell the stories of people of color. I think it's what some of the voices that we've heard recently are trying to say is that we also have color telling the stories of people of color, that we can no longer move forward as a visual culture without that. By not having that level of inclusion, we are trying to rewrite a history, and the history is that, yes, journalism has been a white male gaze stance. That's just reality, and we need to move away from that in order to have an industry that actually aligns with justice, because lack of equity, lack of diverse voices, how are we any different than the forces that we're trying to fight against in our work in a more just society?
Yeah, no, good points all around. Absolutely. You know, I posed the question in my notes, and I'll pose it to you all here. You know, you're an assignment editor. Let's say you're choosing to send someone out on assignment. You know, let's say you have someone of high experience, but they're a majority, and someone of low experience and they're a minority, or high experience and they're a minority, low experience and they're a majority. You know, do you send the experienced person to cover? You know, I take your point. You know, it's sensitive based on which, you know, each individual case. But you know, in general, though, you know, does experience play a role, or is the overriding factor going to be their relation to the subject they're covering? What's sort of your take on that sort of? How do I say?
I certainly hope it all gets. I certainly hope in a just society that it all gets weighed in together. You know, it's you take all the factors and you say what's going to be best for, you know, everyone involved and the article, and look at it that way. I always have a problem with doing something just for the sake of doing it. You know, it's like, oh, you never buy me flowers, and then you buy me flowers. It's like, no, that's not what I meant. It's like, you know, it's the whole part of acknowledging someone and doing the right thing from the get-go.
Sorry, I don't buy you flowers enough, Travis. I apologize for that.
It's true, you know, but it's more, it's not the flowers that are important. It's the acknowledgement of actually doing something for someone in the right, when you're, you know, when it's not Valentine's Day or something like that. It's, you know, it's like you need to have these conversations. You need to do the right thing all along. It's not like suddenly just because it's an issue you start doing it. It has to be a conversation. It has to become part of our lexicon. It has to become what we're taught. It has to be part of, you know, everything that we're about. And unless we start doing it on a daily basis, doing it just because of, you know, a you know, Black Lives Matter issue or something like that, these are starting points. It's the first step, but we need to make sure that this is part of the lexicon of what we do every day.
Okay. Anyone else? You're the assignment editor. What decision do you make?
I mean, I think I couldn't, like Travis said, you've got to weigh all these things. I mean, I can't just look at it in like such black and white terms. I mean, I think you can be reactionary, and you can be an editor who's making reactionary sort of assigning choices. But I think, you know, there are a lot of talented photographers out there, and just, you know, you can bring in new eyes and look at new, you know, people's work that maybe you hadn't considered before. And, you know, you know, it's a broad question, but I think, yes, you like weigh all the factors, you make the best decision, and you realize that maybe if you haven't been hiring enough diverse voices, then, you know, you can reconsider and like, you know, get new perspectives. But it's hard to, you know, it's hard to just balance those to give an answer on those two things. I think, you know, you got to weigh all the factors and look at what's going on, and maybe realize you know, that you haven't. I think that's important for editors to sort of look at the types of people they have been hiring. And I don't think that means, you know, saying, okay, well, we've had somebody working here for, you know, X number of years, but they're not, you know, necessarily a person of color. Like, you know, you don't want to just like change. It's not about like, I'm going to hire this person that's going to make things right, or not hire this person for this assignment. It's just like, you know, like we have to get this right, like for the future, for the long term. This is like these are important issues that we're covering, and there's no quick fix. It's like, how do we make this whole industry better, and the world, and, you know, everywhere a better place? And that's looking at our hiring practices. And now we have the gaze on them. Like Isadora said, you know, it's really important that we're in this moment now. And it's the reasons we're in this moment, maybe for the wrong reasons, but we can sort of, you know, write the course and take a look at all these angles that were neglected, frankly.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I mean, you make a good point. It shouldn't even be a topic of experience. It should just be a matter of you have a group of people who, you know, you can rely on, of a range of diversity of different backgrounds, and you can say, you know, you can assign the right person for the job, right? And it doesn't matter. You're not looking to like, oh man, they shot for 6 years and they shot for 3 years, or they have 6 Pulitzers and they don't have any awards. You know, it should just be like, these are all quality, qualified, you know, visual journalists able to do the job, and I'm going to pick the right person that, you know, can do this job to the best of their ability. I mean, that's what it really should boil down to. You know, obviously we mentioned the photo bill of rights. You know, Isadora, have you looked into that at all? Are you tracking that document?
Yeah, I signed the photo bill of rights. I think it's very important to have all of that information explicitly provided for people to be able to check in with and reflect upon. And what I'll also say is that experience is a place of privilege, right? So who you're giving opportunities to so that they can reach an established level is related to privilege as well. So when we say, oh, this person doesn't have enough experience, well, they don't maybe have enough experience because they're not being assigned go to particular places to have that exposure. So who we're giving those opportunities to is also something we need to be looking at. And I also think that the most empathetic, socially conscious editor still has their own biases, right? Somebody can be very in touch with the notion of toxic masculinity and white supremacy and still exhibit biases in their hiring practices. That this is something that we each need to be doing on a daily basis in refining our ability to be integrated, conscious beings. And biases come up with the most kind-intentioned people. You know, it's not a measure of humanity. It's an issue of sensitivity. It's an issue of consciousness. And I think that some of the greatest editors that I love working with have exhibited certain biases towards me being a young woman. I mean, it comes up because we are tragically socialized to react to certain markers of identity in certain people. And I hope that with more of these discussions, with more of these changes on an institutional level, we'll each as individuals be able to reflect that change in our behaviors on a daily basis, even the most well-intentioned people.
Absolutely. And, you know, we've talked about, I'm sorry, Samson. You know, we've talked about the photo bill of rights on the last few episodes, and, you know, we've had some folks who have been very much in, you know, favor of it. Some people have been very much against it. You know, there has been some criticism and argument stated, you know, for the fact that it, you know, maybe it has a bit too perhaps on the nose with regard to, you know, topics related to the news, you know, with like, you know, the Black Lives Matter and whatnot, and might be, you know, in some of people's opinions, you know, that's might be too politically charged. You know, do you have, you know, as a signatory of it, you know, do you have anything to say to those kind of arguments against it? Or if you've seen the arguments against it, and do you have any thoughts on that?
I'm not particularly plugged into the arguments against it, so I can't really comment on that.
Okay.
Well, there's definitely stuff in there as a photojournalist about in the toolbox if it's saying that you should go up and talk to your people before photographing them, so, let them know. And if you're a photojournalist, there's certain things that's just not going to happen. I mean, how do you take an image of something happening in a protest and running up to the person? I'm going to take your photo. This is what I do. It's like it's just not going to happen. So I mean, there's a lot in. I think it's a very good intention, and this is sort of a recap from the weeks prior. It's a good intention and a good starting point. There's no holding people to it. There's no repercussions. There's no database. It's like why am I signing this? It's like there's a lot in there that's telling me what I can and can't do, but also at the same time you're not holding anybody accountable. It's not like an editor is going to look like, oh, did you sign it? Did you didn't sign it? Am I going to hire you? Or not going to hire you? It's a personal thing for you, and it's not. I think it's written on a slant of one side without taking the other side into consideration. So it's a good starting point, but like I said on everything else, it's not going to make the change. It's just not going to hold people to accountability. It's not going to do anything. So we need to have these conversations every day and not through a Bill of Rights. I think this is a good conversation point. I don't think it's something that people should be signing.
I think it's an ever-evolving document from my experience with some of the people who created it. That it's an
I agree with that.
Yeah, no, I think it puts a lot of good ideas in one place, but like Travis said, it's there's no teeth to it. So, it's a step forward, but it's got a long way to go.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's go ahead.
I'm glad we're having the conversation and doing it, though. That's the important part.
Absolutely.
That's what it's supposed to facilitate, right? I mean, without it, without the book, what do we read? So that's the book, and then we're dissecting it.
Exactly.
Absolutely. All right, let's go ahead and jump to our last topic this week. It's all about you, Isadora. So you covered a really unique story about a threesome couple, an elderly couple, and
threesome. They're not a couple.
A trio. I apologize. They're a trio. I wrote this in my notes. I should have just read off my notes. Here, this is what I was going to say in my notes. Our final topic this evening is all about Isadora, or more specifically, one story she did about a somewhat unusual couple, or should I say trio, of seniors. In her story, Senior Love Triangle, she showcases the lives of Jenny, Will, and Adina, and their unusual relationship. So I'll throw it over to you, Isadora. Tell us about this awesome story and how you kind of came upon it.
Well, I met Jeannie, Will, and Adina at a retirement home in Los Angeles where I was photographing a woman at that point I had been photographing her for 3 years. And I was sitting in the parking lot one night and I saw Jeannie, Will, and Adina approach the gate. And I saw Jeannie enter the facility and I watched Adina and William walk away towards the bus stop because he was taking Adina back to the retirement home where she lived. And I saw Jeannie and this sense of rejection, sense of remoteness, and I empathized with what I saw. And I was curious, which I think is the cornerstone of being a storyteller, is that intense curiosity. So I observed the dynamic, and I inherently knew that there was a romantic conflict going on just from observing them. And I had interacted with Jeannie previously. I had seen her in the dining room when I was photographing Bianca, the woman that I was shadowing at that facility. And I had seen William separately too. I had actually said hello to him and I didn't get a response. He was someone that was definitely in moments very much in his own world. So I approached them a couple of weeks later. I observed them from afar in the facility and around the facility. And I checked in with some of the people working there. And I had noticed that there was always this kind of tension between the three of them and the other people in the facility. And I had overheard Jeannie talking to someone at the front desk about William. So I had confirmed through talking and interacting with people and observing that they were in this non-monogamous dynamic. And that was obviously something I was very drawn to because it was a period in my life where I was very focused on documenting relationships. And having photographed seniors in various facilities from the age of 13 onwards when I first picked up a camera, it was very clear to me over those years of being a self-taught photographer and looking at a documentary photography about aging or aging people, that we have very singular narratives of what aging looks like, especially in this country. We tend to see seniors as depicted as having different diseases or ailments, or we do work around death and dying, which is what I initially started doing myself. I mean, my first project was in hospice care. So over those years, I was trying in the back of my mind to look for stories that were different from what we were seeing in visual storytelling about what it's like to be older, because it's obviously much more complex than being a grandparent or being in a state of demise. So when I saw the three of them, I was captivated. And photographing them, it was interesting because I had spent so much time with seniors, but I didn't really see them as seniors because I was this young adult finding myself, developing, and they really were like peers. And so that when I was documenting them, because their issues and their trials and tribulations were really universal, right? Love, jealousy, possession, connection, desire for intimacy. I mean, those are not solely amongst that age range, obviously. That's throughout our lives. So really rooting myself in the fact that I was photographing a relationship was how I approached them. And initially, I was just spending time with them without my camera. And then over time, started photographing. And then at some point, as is the case with people that you shadow, they started to forget that I was there. And they were the least concerned people of the last 13 years with my photography. They were so consumed with the drama of what was going on amongst them, their needs, being able to keep their dynamic alive as other forces were trying to break them up within their families or within these institutions. So they were so caught up in their lives that I got to just be there as this fly on the wall.
No, that's great. I think that's what we all strive for, you know, in photojournalism and visual journalism, is being able to blend into the background and, you know, just being able to do our work. You know, two things I'll say to that. One, you know, since you were shooting mirrorless, did you shoot on silent mode to kind of put yourself more in the background? And, you know, two, you know, did you ever feel like perhaps they were playing up for you, like initially maybe, and then that sort of went away? And could you see that happening over time? Or was it always something like, you know, at a certain point you earned their trust and it was just always sort of you were in the background at that point?
Well, I photographed them over the course of 3 or 4 years, and they broke up 5 years ago. So this is an early body of work of mine that
Got it.
That recently turned into a book. So at that point, I was not shooting. There was no mirrorless setup. So I had my full-on SLR present. And did I feel that they were playing it up initially? No, they were. It's all about energy, right? As a documentary photographer, as a visual journalist, it's not. Is it really about photography? You know, it's about connecting with people, and that connection is paramount. And they connected with me. There's a kind of nonverbal language that comes up with people that you connect with on that level that you shadow for years. And they just know who you are. I mean, that's the case right now with different assignments and projects. And I'm wearing a mask. I'm 6 feet away. Sometimes I'm 10 feet away. Sometimes I'm just in your doorway, not your bedroom anymore. And it's irrelevant, actually. It's challenging, but people still know who you are. They feel you. They understand your intention, very often in a nonverbal way. And that was very much the case with the three of them, where they just liked me. I mean, I think that's the root of it. You know, they just liked me as a person. They knew the photography was a part of that. They knew it would eventually be public. And when the first section was published in Time in 2012, I told William, you know, the project's out. When I met up with them a day later, you know, do you want to see it? I told him, you know, it's in Time, and he didn't really care. You know, he was just like, okay, great. Like, he was, the story was out there, but they were just much more concerned with having me around and liked my presence. And then ultimately, I think what it came down to was, especially for Jeannie, And I think for William and Adina in different ways, they felt seen and heard through what I was doing. In reflection, in looking back over the course of years when they broke up, it was a sense of, obviously there's a heightened invisibility when you reach that age. I mean, I think that's pretty universally known and almost cliche to say, like, our seniors are pushed aside, they're disenfranchised. I mean, look at what's going on in the nursing homes right now. I mean, if that is a symptom of what I'm discussing, it's a symptom of a culture that undervalues and denigrates our older people because of our correlation between capital and body, and the fact that they are disabled, the fact that many of them require care, somehow in our eyes collectively that makes them unworthy. And I think that this story allowed people to really connect with the fact that seniors have full lives, and just because you retire doesn't mean that you're not looking for love, you're not looking for adventure, which I think the three of them found amongst each other.
I have to think at a root level, they're just enamored by the fact that, one, they're being paid attention to, and that they're being paid attention to by such a young person. That a young person wants to spend time with them and, cover their story and focus on their lives. I think that's something that, probably a lot of our seniors would love to have, that kind of attention. And, I think there's so many great seniors out there with so many great stories to tell. And, it's probably, again, a treasure trove of things. And they're just looking for, someone who honestly cares about what their story is and is willing to tell it. Again, going back to the mirrorless question, though, would you shoot something like this now with mirrorless, or have you used the silent mode? I know Evelyn has talked about, how she likes the mirrorless, and for that matter, the silent capability, it's very effective in a, packed sort of, stateroom or whatnot when you're shooting Congress people. Have you used that capability? Is that something you like about the mirrorless? Do you think you'd use it for this if you were shooting it today?
I think so. I think I would use the mirrorless if I was working with them today. I've used it in contexts where that click can maybe be disruptive. I think it's most helpful to amongst people that aren't that familiar with you as well. And I have this long-term assignment with Nat Geo, and I have been in a context where there are classroom settings for this project. There are moments of silence, of meditation, and that click can be annoying. I mean, I've just adapted to that over the years, but I think it's conducive to the kind of effect we'd like to have, which is present but detached, not an unobtrusive, not adding to the environment, just being in it with people, being immersed. So I think that silent shutter allows for that immersion, perhaps, at least auditorially, to happen more quickly, and then it's helpful in assignments when you have to build trust and intimacy quickly.
Yeah, Evelyn or Travis, do you guys use your mirrorless, or when you did use the mirrorless, did you use it on silent mode, or do you use the shutter sound? What do you use primarily?
I use it.
Or does it matter? Silent?
Yeah.
Travis, your mic is mute.
I got
Still
you.
Muted. There you go.
I'm good. I'm back. It depends on the circumstance. I think obviously there are some limitations when you're shooting on silent and the way it processes the light, and you can have banding issues on certain cameras in silent mode. So if you're shooting in certain lighting and something like that, you don't want to use that mode. But if you're in other situations, like when I'm shooting behind the scenes on a film set or something like that, and it's during a take, you have to put it on film on silent, because otherwise you'd have to put it in kind of a Zeppelin or something like that, and it works fantastic. You can be right next to the sound man, shooting away in a scene, and it has no effect. It's just it's a wonderful addition. Or for people that are shooting weddings in a church or something like that, or very sensitive funerals or certain moments, silent is the only way to go.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The one time, or the one instance I wouldn't use silent mode for, is when you're shooting like really high action, because I've noticed the rolling shutter is much higher in silent mode, at least for my Panasonic cameras. So I was shooting some like drill members, flipping the rifles around, and you could see just like a propeller blade, it's like it's bending the rifle into a C practically. So in that instance, electronic shutter did not work for me. Isadora, you mentioned fly on the wall aspect of your story, and I thought, the photo that most sticks out from your series, or at least, I resonate the most with in terms of just its impact, is the photo where Will yells in Jeannie's face. And I thought, man, if that's like the kind of emotion that comes out when you are a fly on the wall. Can you talk to us a little bit about that photo? And then Evelyn and Travis, if there are any photos that you think, Isadora, you'd like to ask Isadora about, please do.
Well, that photograph was taken about 2 years into shadowing them, maybe less. And William definitely had a propensity for these rageful explosions, which there are a number of other images that depict that when they were on the streets having conflicts, but I feel like that image is the most explicit in depicting that level of anger. And he would have those episodes in front of me, and I think that speaks to the status I had in that space at that point with them, that they were so used to being readily vulnerable in front of me, and I was just a part of the fabric of their experiences, that he didn't feel inhibited to share that level of rage in front of me.
Thank you. It's definitely an unguarded moment for sure. Evelyn, Travis, any pictures or any aspect of the story that stuck out to you?
I mean, the whole thing overall is fabulous, and I'm thankful that there are people doing this type of work.
Yeah, I was curious more about when do you decide like you've shot enough in a long-term project, or it's done, or you come to completion? Like, when does that point come?
That's a good question, and something that a lot of people ask me. They want to know how to set a personal deadline, so to figure out when work goes out into the world. And personally, it's all rooted in intuition. I started this project with this woman in Northern California in 2013, and I told her, she asked me how long would it take for me to work on this project I was doing about her, and I told her 6 months, and it's been 8 years. So, and it's not, I've never shared it. So, I mean, there are less dramatic examples of that in terms of just working on a project for a few years and then deciding that I wanted to publish it. But I've had moments with work where I've published and then regretted it because there's been a new development in someone's life, and I wished I would have stayed longer. I mean, I continue the relationships, but I wish I hadn't shared the work as early as I did. I think it's such a personal choice. I think it's really based on the story. I think it's based on the connection you have. And I think it's ultimately rooted in intuition, which is the way where I work from a lot of the time. And I'll just know at some point in a story that it's ready to be shared. It's ready to go out in the world. And almost always I continue the relationship with the people from that project, and I just continue to add work to their story, because sometimes the story is published again, or there are updates, or just to have as this document of their lives. I mean, you spend years with people, those relationships, at least for me, they continue.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of long-term stories, you mentioned the documentary you've been working on for 8 years. Do you see a point where like that it will be released soon, or you can't even pick a date?
Well, I feel like when I reach intuitively, when I sort of feel into that story, that probably when we reach the 10-year mark, it'll be ready. She's currently grappling with some health issues, which are very much part of her story. So we're waiting to see her through that. I'm waiting to see her through that. And the longer, the better, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
The more you spend it personally with certain subject matters, the more you get at the essence of a person. It goes beyond these journalistic buzzwords, or it's a story about X, Y, and Z, but you get a person at the end of it instead of an issue. And that very much feels the case for that project, where I've just been able to sit in that environment with her for years and really see her through this trajectory. And then there are certain issues that come up with stories. Like, I've been working on a project for 3 years in New Mexico that deals with the effect of prolonged trauma on young women. And one of the young women that I've been shadowing very closely, who I consider basically the main subject of the project, a collaborator, whatever word you want to use, person being documented. Now she's in a legal battle, and I don't want to share the work because I don't want the work to impact the outcome of her case.
Yeah.
Her child custody battle. So sometimes you're ready to share work, but there's something going on in the person's life, and you would hope that sharing their story is a cathartic experience. You'd never want the work to be weaponized. So I think it's about really looking at, not only are you ready to share it, but is it going to harm the person that it's about if it's out in the world at a particular time in their lives too.
Absolutely. Getting back to your love triangle story, you did a TED Talk on it. Can you talk a little about that experience, kind of giving the talk, and then sort of the feedback or the sort of reaction that came from it?
Yeah, I became a TED Fellow in 2018. It's a program. It's a network of about 450 change makers, as they call us, and it's people in all disciplines, imaginable, everything imaginable. It's not so photography or arts, it's science, it's engineering, it's pretty much anything. And I was admitted into that program in 2018, and they asked me to come up with a talk to give at their main conference. And I just couldn't think of another story that would fit into the structure of a TED Talk like this story. It was going to be too hard with the kind of longitudinal work that I do to pick any of my other projects for a 5-minute talk. And I just felt like with their story, it was something that could fit within the structure of what was requested. So I decided to share their story in that format. And the responses have been very telling. I mean, there are people who are very moved. There are people who feel seen through the work. There are people that are very uncomfortable. Everything that you would imagine from a story that deals with some of the themes that we've discussed around aging and older people. And I think most people don't want to think about sexuality amongst older people too. I think that inherently comes up when you're looking at romance. So especially in the US. So like a lot of the discomfort comes from people in the US. You know, when it's out, it's been translated in many languages, and the responses are just different amongst Europeans, for example, or people of other nationalities. So within an Anglo perspective, a lot of people are uncomfortable thinking about older people engaging in this way, because I think inherently, when you're looking at this story, for some people, it's bringing up issues around meaning and fears around maybe never having the love that they want in their lives, fears that it's never going to happen. We have these certain tropes about love and relationships and finding this soulmate. And I think this story, beyond it being about seniors, it's also about adopting new kinds of relationships to get your needs met. And how far will you go to have those needs met? And a lot of people have been in love triangle setups, like practically everybody that I know. I mean, it's just maybe not necessarily as readily talked about. It's certainly not necessarily in these explicit non-monogamous forms, but we've all been in some kind of love triangle, even if it's spiritually, in terms of like being with someone and still thinking about an ex. I mean, that's a kind of triangulation. So I think it pushes people to certain points of assessing the purpose of their own relationships and thinking about meaning and what their expectations are in their love life.
And again, was there any feedback or any sort of like, did the larger stage of the TED provide to you? Did that, give you any sort of feedback from the larger world that perhaps when the larger audience saw that maybe you got more feedback or diverse opinion from it? Or was it basically, again, like I said, a lot of people have different feelings about this, but was there anything like, did it lead to or garner more attention from any other entities?
attention, it's kind of hard to know whether it's certain kinds of attention have come from the talk. I think that it's definitely created conversations from what I've seen. It's been really great to see those conversations be sustained and then be a part of the book that was released in February that is of their story. And I feel like the book is ultimately a more expansive view than the talk. I would say that if anything, the talk also provided a platform for documentary photography. It was an ability, giving me an ability to share their story with a wide audience that, a lot of the people who watch TED Talks, they're not looking at the New York Times, they're not looking at Time Magazine. TED accesses a certain population, so it allowed for a broader view of their story, of some of what we're discussing, but then also of documentary photography, because I went up and I spoke about documentary photography. It wasn't just to talk about their story. There needed to be some context as a visual storyteller. A lot of people don't even know what documentary photography is. I use photojournalists a lot, mainly because I'm kind of tired of explaining what documentary photography is in basic, short conversations in supermarkets with people. So it was also allowing a platform for people to understand what a documentarian is and what the purpose of a documentarian is. I think that platform allowed for that as well. So I think it wasn't just their story that was highlighted, it was documentary photography, documentary storytelling, photojournalism, because those words were used interchangeably in the talk.
Absolutely. Great insight. For the most part, your photos, you're very selective in terms of where you focus. These photos, there's like a shot where, you have one of the ladies, out of focus, and it's because in the background it's, Will and the other woman hugging, and you're showing that sort of dynamic between them. But there were two photos in your set on your website that struck me as not necessarily out of place, but just different from the rest because of their use of focus and blurring and whatnot. Specifically, Will reclines on the floor in his studio apartment, and Janine and Will embrace on the floor. Those two photos in particular are, especially, soft and whatnot and blurry. And I'm just curious, what was sort of your mindset for choosing those as part of the set? What was sort of you getting across showing, these photos in this way?
I think it's film and cinema have been such a profound source of inspiration for me as a documentary photographer, as a photojournalist. I feel like a lot more of my inspiration has come from classic cinema, from Italian neorealism to German expressionism to film noir of the 40s, looking at shadow and light and shallow depth of field. So I would say that the kind of range that is in the edit on the website, which hasn't been updated in a long time, but if you look at the book, you see that too. Just giving people different senses of their mood, just being able to give people the spectrum of what I experienced, shadowing them, and that be reflected in the kind of technique as well. And a kind of loneliness too. I think shallow depth of field you're looking at a subjectivity within that. It's more, if you study cinema, that's certainly used in movies as an attempt to get into the actor's head or that character's head. So I think, not necessarily thinking about that actively as I'm photographing, but in hindsight, I think certain images, the way that they're shot, I think it's trying to reflect being inside, being with that person, being attuned to that person, and then ultimately a certain kind of remoteness, which I think is just a part of my work in general. It's so much about loneliness. I don't really feel like this project is about love necessarily. I think it's so much more about a desire to connect and a remoteness, and then ultimately getting at even when you're with someone, you can still feel lonely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I don't want to dominate the conversation. Travis or Evelyn, do you have any questions about this story or anything for Isadora?
No, it was very in-depth and wonderful, and I definitely suggest people go look at the work because it's great.
Yeah, absolutely.
And go buy the book, right? Is the book out?
Absolutely.
Or when does the book come? Is the book?
The book is out on Amazon. Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, I will put a link to the book on our show notes, so go check that out. You said you photographed this 5 years ago, so what's the status of the story now?
So William and Adina have since passed away, and Jeannie is still living. She's living with family. They broke up, and Adina and Jeannie's families moved them elsewhere to different locations. So Adina actually moved out of state, and Jeannie relocated with her family in a different part of California. And William ultimately passed away without having any connection to the two of them. They all lost touch. And he's buried in the military cemetery here in Riverside County, California, because he was a World War II veteran. And Jeannie has been struggling with memory impairment for quite some time. I wish they could see the book. I wish Adina and William could see the book, but their energy felt very present when I was printing it in Germany in November. The story is also the basis for a narrative feature film that's coming out in 2021. And that's another interpretation of their story that I co-wrote. So they've had many lives, more than they ever imagined. Jeannie always dreamt of being a known actress. And I feel like she's getting her stage finally, or she's getting her spotlight through my work, which I never imagined either, because when I was working on this project, I didn't expect it to have the kind of resonance that it's had. So I'm just pleased to see them live on. They had very full lives. Adina was a linguist. She spoke 5 or 6 languages. They had careers, they had marriages, they had children, and then they had this. And I'm pleased to see them liberating people from some of the secrets that come up through this project.
Awesome. Well, hopefully we can have you back on when that movie comes out.
Oh, yeah,
you can talk to us about going to the premiere of it.
I would love to be able to come back and talk about it. It's a whole other discussion. Yeah.
Definitely. All right. Well, I think that's going to bring us to the end of this week's show. Isadora, can you tell people where they can find more about you and your work?
Well, you can find me on Instagram at my name, at Isadora Kosofsky, or add me on Facebook, which I don't really use, or follow me on Twitter, which I don't really use either. So I'd suggest Instagram. You can also go to my website, isadorakosofsky.com. And if you have any questions and I didn't cover something in here, feel free to email me. Thanks.
What people don't know is Isadora has a very vibrant MySpace page, which she's always on and updating.
That's really funny because I used to post my photos on MySpace.
Oh, okay. I'm sure Tom liked them.
I can't my MySpace though. It's a bummer. I'd really like to see those old messages, but
right.
Yeah, it's all my glitter GIFs and auto playing music. It's all gone to the.
I miss all my AOL Instant Messenger messages.
Yeah. CompuServe.
Now, who's going to be on your top 8?
I don't know. Facebook needs to make that a feature. All right. Well, that brings us to the end of this week's show. Evelyn, you got anything for us before we sign off?
I do not. Enjoy your week, everyone, and I'll see you next week.
And always remember to top up your coffee.
That's right.
Travis, anything going on in your world we need to know about?
No, what was that, Dave?
I was gonna say, where are you gonna be and when are you gonna be there at all times? Just list of your locations.
Yeah, unfortunately, the travel has been cut down by this crazy world. So I'm not
at your house and all the time.
Yep. I'm shooting myself.
Indeed. No, I've seen you've done some good self-portraits. I like that one you did where it's like you took a portrait from like 10 years ago and updated it to today. I thought that was pretty neat. That's a neat project.
Yeah, it's I started this whole kind of photographer support kind of group that all kind of helps each other, and we do a weekly challenge, and that one was to take an old picture and kind of re-envision it and redo it. But each week we kind of come up with these great challenges, and it's amazing to see when you just say like one word, all the different interpretations and wonderful work that comes out of it.
I like that. Photographer support group. Photographers Anonymous. That
yeah,
might be
exactly.
A thing. Hello, I'm Dave, and I've been photographing for 21 years.
The initial title for the group was Sunday Night Support. Sunday Night. What was it? Sunday Night. Oh, now I'm forgetting. I can't wait.
Well, thank you for all joining us and watching this Monday night support group or Monday morning support group, depending on when you're watching it or when you're checking it out.
It was Sunday night group therapy. That's what it was.
Oh, okay. Great. Well, if you'd like to continue the therapy, please do so online by going to one of our social media networks, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, all that fun stuff. You can leave comments on what we've talked about. You can argue with us online, tell us we're wrong or right, whatever you'd like to do. So continue the conversation online. You can find links to all of our show notes as well as all of our social media at aroundthelens.com. Additionally, if you'd like to support the show financially, you can go to patreon.com/aroundthelens and join for as little as $1 a month to get everything we do ahead of time, and not to mention a lot of cool exclusive stuff that we put only on there. So go check that out and support the show, or tell someone about the show. That'd be the biggest support you can do right there. Just spread the word and let's grow the audience. All right. Well, that's going to end it for this week's show, episode 234. Isadora, thank you so much for taking time out to be here. I truly appreciate it. Happy to have you on anytime you want. And for Evelyn Hochstein and Travis Keys, I am David J. Murphy. This has been episode 234 of Around the Lens, and we're out.
Thanks for listening to Around the Lens. We hope you enjoyed the show. To continue the conversation, head on over to one of our social media outlets such as Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, or Twitter. To support the show financially, consider donating to us via Patreon. For show notes from this week's episode and links to everything else we talked about, just go to our website, aroundthelens.com. Finally, if you or someone you know might be a good guest for the show, get in touch with us via email at info@aroundthelens.com.